So I'll go ahead and get started. I am going to try to stay within my time, right? 12 to 15, 10 to 12 minutes, yes? I will do my best. I apologize for my incredibly boring title, A Brief Overview of Immigration. There's a lot of material I could cover in this, and obviously I would teach a whole seminar in this at MSU. So I'm just going to touch on very quickly, I think, some key things that I think are really going to be of interest to most people. If I don't hit the thing you're interested in, my apologies, but feel free to ask me questions afterwards. Like most professors, I can talk about anything for about 45 minutes. All right, so I'm going to start, just to give you some sense of my background. I know general information about migration. I teach it, I write about it. Most of my work is on refugees and refugee resettlement in the US. And right now I've got a project looking at refugees and their incorporation in Turkey. And so I wanted to start with refugees because this is one of the more controversial topics around immigration that I think is happening right now. And it's a little bit unusual because in general, refugees have historically been one of the least contested immigrant groups. They represent a very small proportion of all immigrants, and they are arguably the ones we tend to have the most compassion for in their desire to come to the United States. So what's happening right now is not unprecedented, but it is a little bit unusual. So if you look at this graph right here, all these data, by the way, come from the Migration Policy Institute, great source for compiling data. And the analysis that they do largely comes from the American Community Survey, which everyone in this room can look at and access through the U.S. Census Bureau's website, American Fact Finder, including specific demographics and things about your all the way down to townships, I think. So this graph right here depicts refugee resettlement entrance into the United States. The blue line, which is almost always at the top, is the annual ceiling. That's the number of refugees that the U.S. Congress has determined is going to be our limit for who we can bring in, and we've determined this based on, in part, informed by how many refugees there are that need resettlement as a durable solution or a permanent solution to their displaced situation, and also how much money we want to budget for this. The red line, which is almost always underneath the blue line, is who we actually bring in. So generally speaking, we almost always bring in fewer people than we've budgeted for and for which we've intended to bring in. And I just want to bring I'm not going to try to use the little thing because I'm going to do something wrong, but if you look at the red line where it dips down, right there after the year 2000, that is, of course, the post 9/11 dip in refugee admissions. This I want to bring your attention to because there's a lot of talk around, when there's a terrorist attack somewhere in Europe, we should stop our refugee resettlement in the U.S. and vet our program, our existing program. Look at it, do an audit of it, and make it stronger. The reality is that we did that in 2011 already. We completely stopped all refugee resettlement for about 3 months, and then some groups didn't restart until 2 years later. And right now we have 7 different federal agencies that are part of the security process for approving refugees to come to the United States. The U.S. State Department will advertise that it takes an average of 2.5 years, but that is an average, and it doesn't describe the variation very well. Many refugees coming here now, particularly from the Middle East, take 7 years, 8 years, sometimes even longer. The ones that come close to that 2.5-year average generally are like people. There was a Iraqi couple that were resettled here from Turkey. One was missing a leg, and the other one was missing both his arms. They had lost them in explosions, and they needed medical treatment desperately, and so they were expedited, and I think it still took about 2.5 years to approve them to come to the U.S. So if somebody says, we need to vet the process, you want to ask them, well, what do you think the process ought to be? And almost always they describe a security process that's less secure than what we have in place right now. So that's why it's really important to understand know what we're already doing before you decide we need to do it better. So this figure depicts data on the civilian labor force and the percent of that labor force that is that is immigrants. So generally speaking, immigrants come to the U.S. mostly for some economic reasons. Some of them are coming as refugees, some are coming to reunify with family, some are coming for educational opportunities, but by and large, there's a strong economic driver, not just to bring immigrants to the U.S., but to bring immigrants to certain places in the U.S., like Michigan. So when we're talking about immigration, we have to think about, what the economic drivers are of that. So this blue line is the foreign-born as the share of the civilian labor force, and the red line is the foreign-born as share of the total population. So what this graph tells you is that foreign-born people that includes immigrants, people who are permanently resettling here, as well as non-immigrant foreign-born, people who have a temporary visa to come to the U.S. and work. Not all of these folks will stay in the U.S., but they're all born in another country. The immigrants and foreign-born are overrepresented in the workforce compared to their percentage in the U.S. population. Now, and particularly we see a diverging, trajectory around 2000, 2002, where they're becoming a larger and larger percentage of the workforce. Now, one might look at this and say, well, this looks like immigrants are taking U.S. jobs, right? They're taking jobs away from U.S.-born people. The reality is, though, that immigrants are not like people born in the U.S. They are, for one thing, they're selected based on their age. So you get larger percentages of immigrants coming to the U.S. who are working age. They're between 20 and, say, 45, 50. And the issue with the U.S. population is that we have an aging population, right? So a much larger percentage of people that are born in this country are retiring or starting to retire, pulling out of the labor market. Immigrants tend to be much more concentrated among the working age. And you can see this, you can see this in this population pyramid. Please stick with me if this is hard. I love population pyramids. And if you can find ones that are interactive, where you can carry it through years and see how the pyramid changes, it's super fun. So this pyramid on the right is the U.S. born population, or the total U.S. born population. And the one on the left is the U.S. immigrant population. So you can see that U.S. immigrants to the U.S. are concentrated in those prime working age groups because immigrants, by and large, are drawn to the U.S. for economic opportunities. They've come here to work. And so they are going to be overrepresented in the labor market because there's more working age immigrants in the U.S. per the population of the foreign-born than there are among the U.S. And you can see, I'll just tell you, I'm going to be turning 45 in about a month. I'm in that age group right there, that big dip. What we worry about is that bulge above me, which is the baby boomers, right? We worry about them moving up into retirement with fewer and fewer people of working age to support them and to support Social Security. The solution is quite simple if you look at the left pyramid over there. Lots of working age people who are going to be paying into the Social Security and Medicare system and supporting all of those boomers who are going to be moving into retirement and using more and more of those resources. So we don't have to create a lockbox or any of this kind of thing, or even adjust retirement age if we think about this population that's being drawn to the U.S. as a resource for our larger economy. There is one issue with migrant workers that comes up time and time again, and that's the undocumented or the unauthorized population. I like to use the term unauthorized because it tends to encapsulate people who have entered the U.S. without inspection, meaning they've crossed a border illegally, people who have come here with a legal visa, and that visa has expired and they haven't renewed. It captures a lot of different groups. Sometimes people are only unauthorized for a period of time. I'll tell you, I was an immigrant to Turkey at one point, and because the Turkish government lost some of my paperwork, I was undocumented for about a month and a half. So it can happen to anyone. This map right here shows us the population of unauthorized migrants in particular counties in the United States. The larger the circle, the larger the population of unauthorized migrants. So you can see we've got lots of big circles in California, lots of big circles in Texas, one big circle there in Chicago, not very many big circles in Michigan. Now that doesn't mean that we're not affected by unauthorized migration, but in terms of the context of where this might be a problem and what we need to do to address it, it's not a big problem in Michigan. So here's a close-up of Michigan. That dot on the left there in the west is Kent County. The one just at the bottom there is Wayne County, and just above it is Oakland. There's variation in where that population is coming from. I can talk about that, but on the whole, doesn't mean there's no unauthorized migrants anywhere else. There's just so few of them, they don't really show up much. So I want to close with another group of immigrants. I don't have a fancy figure or graph for this, I'm sorry. I want to talk about one last immigrant group, and this is going to set up Chris, I think, she's going to go into a lot of details about this, are non-immigrant student visa holders. So as a professor at Michigan State and an administrator, now I have to go, when I'm administrating, I have to go to all these boring meetings where we talk about projections and where revenue is going to be coming from. And my center is in the College of International Studies and Programs, and so we're very concerned about international students. I can tell you that the bulk of our out-of-state students come from overseas. And the bulk of those international students are coming from China, and we're looking at potential increasing numbers from India. Because out-of-state students pay more tuition, they pay more in tuition than it costs to educate them. Michigan in-state students pay less than what it costs to educate them, which means that we need out-of-state students, and which means we need international students. We are looking at serious shortfalls in our budget to the tune of tens of millions of dollars because international students aren't going to be coming to Michigan State at the numbers we had anticipated. There's a lot going on with that. We sometimes get calls from consulates. Is it safe for our students to come to the U.S.? We saw these attacks against immigrants, against foreign-born people. We're concerned. We hear the rhetoric coming out of D.C. that sounds like you don't want immigrants in your country anymore. You don't want international people. And there's lots of other places these students can go, not just within the U.S., but there are some great universities in Europe, in UK, in Germany, that are now drawing these students that we could have had. This is an absolutely critical issue for the health of higher education in the U.S. There are some reforms that we can put in place to save money, to pinch pennies, but the government gives state universities less and less money every year, and those funds have to be replaced from somewhere. And they had been replaced by international student tuition. So we are, I know at Michigan State and at ISP especially, we're very concerned about what's going to happen with those numbers. It's not just about the money, of course, and the tuition, it's about the human capital that's coming in. We are looking at, most of those students coming in are in STEM fields and business. So we need that kind of intellectual energy coming into our country because many of them will stay here and contribute to our economy in other ways. It's an issue, of course, for higher education, but it's also an issue for employment sectors that rely on highly educated workers. So I know at MSU we're looking at these numbers very carefully, and I know Chris can give you some additional details on that. So thank you very much.